listening to the Today's Mama podcast with your host, Rachel Hersher. Welcome to this week's episode of the podcast. We are multitasking all the goodness for you. There's stuff that will help your life, your parenting, your work. Basically, we'll figure out your life's purpose. Enjoy this episode with David Mead. You don't often find me reading fiction, except for that time I went hard into the Twilight series. I read a lot of business books because I find them relevant for not only business, but also personal development and, yes, parenting. For this episode, I went after the team over at Start With Why. Today, we're talking to David Mead, who co-authored Find Your Why with Simon Sinek, who is the author of Start With Why and the guy who presented one of the most watched TED Talks in history. I think Simon's TED Talk has over 40 million views to it. David is globally recognized as the how guy to Simon's why. For many of us, our why as parents is raising good humans that make the world a better place, growing these little people up to be happy and to find purpose and fulfillment. So I thought I'd chat with David Mead and talk about how. Welcome to the Today's Mama podcast, David.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here.
So this is the piece I've been dying to talk to you about. In my little pre-interview form, I asked you to tell me something about where you live, and you had a very charming, picturesque response, and I'm going to read it back to you. Okay. So you said, "We are nestled up against the foothills of the Rockies on a secluded street with deer in our yard every day."
Yeah. Isn't that magical?
That is magical, because then I started freaking out because could your foothills of the Rocky Mountains possibly be the same foothills of my Rocky Mountains?
Maybe.
Where are you?
I am in Sandy, Utah.
Snap! I'm in Holiday, Utah.
What? Really?
What? We had no idea.
That's hilarious.
Yep, this is the place, bro.
You know it.
So full disclosure, I got super excited, and then I looked at the area code on your phone number, and I noticed that we were both in the 801.
Yeah.
And I got even more excited. I was hoping that you would be in the Holiday Mill Creek area so I could be like, dude, you're like 5 minutes from my house. But I will take Sandy.
Well, I'm like 10 minutes from your house, so.
Forgivable. Smallest world. So glad you get to live in the best place in the whole wide world with me.
I know.
Okay, so did you grow up here?
Yes. I grew up in Bountiful, which is about 30 miles north of here. But yeah, spent most of my life here in Utah.
Oh, dude, the land northward. So where did you go to high school? Woods Cross?
Yes.
David Mead, we are from the same place. Except for you probably graduated quite a bit earlier than me.
Are you saying I'm old?
Earlier, later. I'm older than you is what I'm trying to say.
I graduated in 94.
Shut your mouth. Okay, I'm 2 years younger than you.
There you go.
I'm class of 96. We're not that old. We're still so young.
Totally.
Well, so tell me this. This is the perfect time to move to my favorite question. And I ask everybody on this show, and I did send you the little movie clip in advance. I hope you got it.
I did.
Because I only sent it like an hour ago.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't, but I know which movie clip you're talking about. And it like immediately came to my mind.
Okay, good. I'm going to ask you what your ratatouille is. And while you think about that, for those of you who haven't seen the movie, you'll always find a link in the show notes to this clip. But there's a scene where the grouchy food critic tastes some food that takes him back home. And it's a moment that just transports him. So the question for you is, what is your ratatouille, that food, the taste, or the sight that takes you back to your childhood?
So can I do a smell? Because
yes.
And you might know this smell. It's the smell of Little Cottonwood Canyon. It has a different smell than Big Cottonwood Canyon. I don't know what it is, if it's the trees that are in that, but like the scent of those trees and the scent of that canyon takes me back to when I was a kid. Like that is probably the one thing that takes me back.
Yes. And that is the best smelling canyon on the face of the earth.
Oh, so good.
Let's say that.
Yeah.
Now, there's also a smell related to Utah, and I usually smell it in the spring or the summertime. Whenever I land at the airport and get off the plane, there's a smell in the air, and I don't know what to credit it to. I know it's some tree. Have you ever experienced that? I walk out of the airport, I'm like, there we are. I'm home.
No, I'm usually smelling very different things at the airport.
Listen, there is an aromatic little place. Maybe it's the trees at the airport. I'll figure it out. It's not the bad smells of the airport. It's a good one.
Yeah, there are those two.
Yeah, there's those two. Okay, I'm going to ask you about the why and the how. So let me preface these questions again to our readers from the standpoint that I'm going to ask them through the lens of parenting but these are kind of business topics. So anyone who's listening to this should think about this not only through the lens of parenting, but your own personal development or for your work and your business too. I find, especially with Start With Why, that I can apply a lot of this stuff to my kids. So I'm going to start with this question for you. How can we figure out what our why is as parents?
It's an interesting question because it's a little bit loaded. Your why as a parent is actually the same why that you have at work. It's the same why that you have at church. It's the same why that you have with your friends in the community. We only have one. Where we choose to bring that to life changes, but our why doesn't. So a lot of people think, I have one why at work and I have a why at home. Simon has a quote that I love. He says, if you are a different person at work than you are at home, in one of those two places, you're lying. So the opportunity is for us to be who we are at our best, to live our why no matter where we are. And the way that we find that why is really by digging into our past, into our experience. So the why, essentially, it's a representation of who we are at our natural best. It's the contribution that we make. It's the impact that we have on the lives of the people around us. The way that we find that is by telling specific stories and experiences, or recounting specific experiences from our past that have had the biggest impact on us. Those impactful times, those times that are filled with the most meaning or the most joy or the most fulfillment, there were things going on that really fill us up, that give us that meaning or that fulfillment. And even though those different stories, we might tell stories from, work last week or from our childhood or from, a family vacation, whatever it was, all of these stories, as different as they seem, they'll have something in common. There's a common thread or a pattern, what we call the golden thread, that we look for. And there are certain things that are present in each of those stories, or in most of those stories at least, that sort of point to what we value, what we care about, what we find meaning in, the difference that we want to make, the gift that we give essentially to the people around us. And that becomes sort of the essence or the foundation of our why. The beauty of it is when we look to the past to discover that, we can then move forward in the rest of our lives looking for opportunities to bring that about, rather than having, some event or something happen by accident and then being able to say, when it's over, oh, that was so fulfilling, that was so meaningful, I would love to be able to do that every day. We can actually choose to put ourselves in those situations consciously.
You just blew my mind, actually.
We just started.
I know. And I already while you were talking, I had like a huge revelatory moment to myself. Because here's the thing. I actually had sorted my why into two buckets.
Uh-huh.
Because I have a life as an entrepreneur and a business owner and someone who creates content. And I would maybe describe that differently than I would describe my why or my job as a parent.
Mm-hmm.
But then I just figured out what the common ground is.
Whoa, good for you. That's tough to do in the moment.
No, I know, it totally blew my mind, because I'm sitting there spinning my wheels while you're describing this. And I'm like, oh my gosh, my why is a piece of crap. Like, I don't even know what it is anymore. It hit me what it is. So I've always been a person, even when I can think in junior high and high school, I have always been connecting people to each other or to information, resources. Like, I like to say, if somebody's sick, come talk to me. I got like 10 billion voodoo doctors I can point you to. Like, I joy in seeing something and saying, oh, what things go together. And for my kids, I think I've always looked at them as well and said, okay, you're like this awesome little ball of potential and possibility, and you're so you. And what do you need? What do you need to grow into like your best version of yourself, right? And then I try to give them, and here's the word that I just like landed on, I try to give them the tools to do it.
Mm-hmm. The interesting thing is, when a lot of people have done a lot of thinking about this, and they've come up with something that feels really good for being a parent, for example. They've come up with something that really fits with their career. And when they hear this notion or this idea that your why is that you only have one, it kind of throws them for a loop, because it feels like those two different things are at odds with each other because they express them differently. And it's not that, but the key is to do what you have just done. And most people can't do it in the moment like you've just done it, which is really great. But the idea is to kind of, fly up 30,000 feet and look for what is it that is common among those two things, not what makes them different.
Yeah. And the thing that's common is I love giving people tools. I love giving my kids tools to figure out like their emotions and their life and develop who they are. And I love giving people tools like this podcast to give people tools to be better parents, or whether it's events we've hosted, it's always been about giving people tools.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, drop the mic and scene. That is my life's purpose that I just barely figured out.
Cool. Congratulations.
Now, I don't want to gloss over, you mentioned your favorite quote too. And also, let me back up and just say thank you for that gigantic light bulb that exploded into my brain like fireworks.
You're welcome.
So, I want to go back to that quote that you mentioned. If you're a different person at work than you are at home, in one of those two places, you're lying. Now, as parents, or as a spouse, or even as a roommate, I think we can come home and we've given everyone in our day our best, and we walk through the doors to our home and we're kind of empty. And not because we've intended to give our family our worst, but we're just tapped out. So, thoughts, any advice for recharging, whether as a leader or at work, or when you come through the door and you think, oh, my tank is empty, I've given away my best of the day?
Yeah. So I have a couple of thoughts, none of them right, just my perspective. So I'm going to maybe take a little broader view of this and talk about the opportunity that I guess we have, which is, and most of the work that we do at Start With Why is with organizations, and not because this is necessarily a business concept or a management idea. It's a very, very human, fundamentally human concept. The reason that we focus on businesses is because that's where we can reach the most people, because most people have a job. That's sort of our vehicle. I'll sort of paint a picture of the world that we imagine, which is a world in which the vast majority of people wake up inspired to go to work, feel safe while they're there, and come home at the end of the day fulfilled by the work that they do. Unfortunately, that is not a reality for most people. And so the reason that we get, and I'm speaking in generalities here, but the reason that people get, tapped out, they are drained, they have nothing left at the end of the day to give to their family or friends or roommate or whoever they're going home to, is not necessarily because the amount of work that they've done. It's because of the lack of fulfillment and meaning that they find in their work. I mean, we on our team, we work exceptionally hard. There are organizations out there that are, sort of living the principles that we talk about of purpose and meaning, and creating an environment where people can contribute to something bigger than themselves, where they find inspiration at work. And it's not that they work any less or that they have more fun, quote unquote, than anybody else, but the feeling that you get when you are contributing to something that matters, the feeling that you get when you go to work knowing your own individual why and the difference that you can make to the people around you, that feeling, when we can work in an environment like that, that allows us to come home actually feeling exhausted, yes, but in a good way. We can come home feeling like, man, I made a difference today. And look, it's not like we're out saving the world every single day. We're still going to have bad days. We're not going to like our jobs every day, but I'm speaking again on the whole. When we can clearly understand our why, go to work, ideally at an organization where we can bring that why to life, where our gift is something that contributes to the greater whole of the organization, that is really the key to coming home and having more to give. So that's one thought. The other thing too is when we, despite our best efforts, despite as great as our companies may be at doing this, sometimes we're going to have a bad day. We're going to have, things will have gone wrong. And one thing that I sort of think of, and this is really tough to do, and it's practice, and it has to become sort of a habit. We have to be really aware and conscious of this, is not to change who we are when we get home. Because again, that goes back to that quote. We should authentically be able to be ourselves. But to be able to sort of, and I actually visualize this sometimes, is when I have something that's really weighing on me and I don't want it to transfer into my relationships at home with my wife or my kids. I just don't want to bring that thing. I visualize when I walk through, and I work from home, so I have to I kind of have to fake this. I have to go to a door in my house because I can't use I guess I could use my front door, but now it's cold. I don't want to go outside. So
yeah, it's super cold.
But I go to a door, and literally when I walk through that door frame, I imagine that issue, that problem just shedding, right? And I leave it behind. I still have to deal with it. I still have to pick it up, but that's going to be for tomorrow at work. And that allows me to, again, just sort of bring my whole self to sort of leave that burden, that stress, that weight off of me, at least for the short term. Even if it's something I got to go back and work on later on that evening, to at least be able to be fully present and with the people that I'm with. That's, another thought. So I don't know if any of that made sense, but those are some thoughts on this idea of being tapped out or exhausted when we get home from work.
Well, and it also reminded me of something that I do as a parent, but I actually need to do this more myself. So I'm big on second chances. I'm big on giving my kids second chances. My kids probably get tired of it because how many times they've heard me say, I'm going to let you do that again. Because they know what that means. They have to reverse away from me like a robot and turn around and come back and literally just start over. So if they got in a fight with their sibling and they want a really quick fix, or if they came to me with a whole bunch of attitude to work out a problem, I'll let them start again. And all right, let's do it different next time.
Cool.
I think as adults, I mean, we can do that too, but we don't often ask for that. Like, hey, you know what? Let me restart. Let me start over. I am in a
Hmm.
bad mood. I'm off, because we always kind of want to be right or look like we've got it together.
Totally.
And then for each other, we need to be willing to let each other start again. Like, okay, yeah, you know what? I don't know what you brought with you, but like reverse, let's start again and just pretend like it didn't happen. It's like a really nice grace we can give each other. The other part is I can be really honest with my family about like, oh man, I am worn out, or here's the day I had, I'm going to take a minute. I am famously known for I'm using air quotes, my power cat. That's my 15-minute cat nap
Hmm.
where I just go in my room and I lock the door and I sleep
Hmm.
for 15 minutes and I'm a new woman after that.
That's awesome. And I think, what you're saying is so important. This is coaching that I have received myself, which is like, tell people what you're feeling and thinking. Like, if you're in a bad mood, if you had a rough day, instead of just keeping it inside and, barreling through, say it. And like you said, sometimes it's tough because we want to feel like, especially, in my case where I see myself as the provider, I see myself as, sort of a leader in my home. I want to make it seem like I've got it all figured out. I have it all together. I'm good. Like everything's fine. And, I'm here to make sure everything is working right. And it's sometimes tough to say, hey, man, I'm really struggling right now. I could just use, like, I know you've had a busy day taking care of the kids. Is it possible for me to just have 10 minutes? Because I'm not going to show up at my best right now.
Yeah, it's permission to be human, both for you, but when we're human, everyone around us like has permission to be human too.
You're listening to the Today's Mama podcast with your host, Rachel Hersher. We'll be back right after this.
This episode is brought to you by Chatbooks, our favorite photo book company. But wait, they're more than a photo book company. Holiday cards are here. 20 cards for $20 plus free shipping. Seriously, go to chatbooks.com or download the app and get holiday cards off your to-do list.
And now back to the Today's Mama podcast with your host, Rachel Hersher.
On the next note of this, it's how can we help our kids figure out their why?
So there's a little bit of, actually a lot of science behind this, which is that our why is formed by the time we're about 18, 19, 20. So if you think about, the parents, the coaches we've had, mentors, teachers, the way we were raised, all of these things contribute to who we become as human beings. So the science behind it says that we are basically who we are going to be by about 18, 19, 20 based on that upbringing. And again, that's a general time frame. Some get it a little, some have that sense a little bit earlier. Some it takes a little bit longer. Simon's actually been working on a little bit of this to figure out, how do we help adolescents, for example, really tap into their why? Because it's still sort of in formation phase, right? While we might not be able to necessarily nail down the why at a super early age, I think what we can do is be intentional about helping our kids figure out what it is that lights them up. And I'm talking about more than excitement, right? It's not about like riding the biggest roller coaster at Six Flags and like, wow, that was super cool. Like, because that goes away, right? It's about what is it that we can help them to figure out when they do something, when they're out doing some sort of activity or interacting with people. Like, if we know what to look for, which is what is it that really lights them up? What is it that helps them to feel like, wow, I really made a difference, or man, that felt really good, because they're still learning as well. They're not maybe going to be able to express it in words the way that we might do it. But when we know that a why is the contribution that we make in the lives of people and the impact that has, those are really the two components of a why, we can begin to look for that. And even if we're not orchestrating those opportunities, like they'll naturally come up when we see them interacting with somebody, even if it's a sibling, right? If we constantly see them doing a particular thing, if they're sort of that protector, if they're the ones that, I'm not going to do it for you, but I'll show you how to do it. Like these kind of things we can sort of begin to look at, start to look for patterns. What do we see that they're really good at? What is their gift? What is it that, people benefit from when they're around? We can sort of help to make them aware of those things so that they can engage in those types of activities, or they can be at least conscious that this is what I do really well. And I think that makes it a lot easier for them when it comes time to maybe put some more firm articulation or words to their why. they'll have a good sense of what it is already.
So, something I love to do with my kids is I love to tell them what people observe about them. So, if other adults say, oh, hey, like I saw, your child do this or this, or I noticed they did something really cool last week, or they were really nice to this kid, or whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Any compliment anybody gives me about them, I love to later rework that into a conversation about them. Like, hey, do you know what so and so noticed about you? Because likely in that moment, they were doing something good that lights them up. And by giving them that extra validation that, like, hey, someone noticed and someone thinks this is really cool about you, I think it lights them up even more and maybe even like feeds that desire to do more of that thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, when we can even share with them the impact that thing had that they did on somebody else, that's an added piece that they can, it's not just this is what you're good at or this is what somebody said, but this is how it affected the person that you did it for, is another extra piece that can help them feel really good about what they've done.
How old are your kids right now?
So I have a 9-year-old boy and a 2-year-old girl.
Okay. And the 2-year-old would be tough, but any ideas what lights up your 9-year-old boy? What his why might be kind of cooking in there?
It's really tough because he's into different things and I see different personality traits coming out, but he has this ability to create things from nothing, whether that be, just a box full of Legos and he'll come up with this thing that is like, just like you would never have guessed that he had that in his brain. Or if it's like, he's really into magic right now. So he just sort of this idea of creativity, of bringing something to light. That's a piece of it. I think there's a creative piece of it. And so one other thing just to plug in here is there are a couple of components to this thing. One is the why, which is really, again, our purpose. What is the contribution, the impact that we make? The second thing, which is a little bit more tactical, it's a little more behavioral, is the hows. And these are our guiding principles. They're the traits that we display, essentially the behaviors that we engage in that allow us to bring our why to life. So for example, I just jotted down a note here. When you said I always give people second chances, I think that may be one of your hows. Like this is just a behavioral thing that you do that when, among other behaviors that you have, when you give people second chances, they're able to better partake of the tools that you want to give them. Right. So anyway, sidebar.
Yeah, no, and I love that because you hit the nail on the head, because what I expect of my kids when I give them their second chance, right, is to back out of the room and be like, okay, don't wait, how should this really go? And use those tools of like, okay, I'm going to change, my attitude or my tone, or I'm going to ask a little differently. And those are tools, right? So that's exactly what that is.
Sure. So kind of where I was going with that is I see some of these things with my son also are just sort of the behavioral things. He's very interested in what other people are feeling. He is extremely headstrong. I don't know where that's going to go or what that's going to turn into, but like I see these little glimpses of things that it'll be really interesting to see what his why will end up being.
So when you said he's really headstrong, that made me think of how I think, especially when my kids were younger, I would look at their greatest weakness, right? Which might be like a temper or persistence, like overly persistent.
Combined with a temper. Yeah.
Yeah, all the things. But I really can look at my kids and say the thing that maybe drives me the most nuts about them, what I might say is their biggest weakness, like my daughter who is so persistent, right? That actually will be her greatest strength in life. And it's just which direction do I want to channel that energy?
Totally. And that's actually, as you say, hit the nail right on the head, which is how do we channel that? How do we use that for good so that he is firm and determined and adamant and immovable on the right things?
Yeah. And my daughter, who literally I counted once and she had asked me over 20 questions in 5 minutes. There's curiosity, there's persistence, there's energy, there's a lot of stuff there that in that moment were driving me nuts. And as she gets older, that, funnels into more creative and proactive directions, right? I can say my son, who I'm going to say he's all about justice, right? He was really about justice and right and wrong and all of those things. He really cares a lot about justice, but can I have him care about that in really productive ways as opposed to who's right and wrong?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Well, so here's a follow-up question to all that we just talked about, which is how do we foster experiences or an environment that helps our families live out their why? What can we kind of build into our homes or our philosophies, that will set the stage for that?
Wow, that's a big question. I'll just say the first thing that came to mind, which is to talk, actually, to ask questions, to be curious about our family members and what they care about. I mean, I'll speak from my experience, and this is probably, I know I'm not the only one, but so often, especially when you have young kids at home, it's so, I mean, the conversation can become so mundane, right? It's like, oh, she needs a diaper change. Hey, did you eat your food? Go brush your teeth. It's like all of these day-to-day things that's all we talk about. And then at the end of the day, we're so tapped out and the kids are, finally falling asleep and we're barely making it to the bedroom to fall asleep ourselves. We just don't engage in meaningful conversation. And so I think part of it is just a time of life thing. When kids are little, that's just kind of the deal. But for those who have, kids that are in the teenage years or, are a little bit older and able to be part of those conversations, I think making time to talk, whether it's as a family or parent to child, whatever it is, just to be together and to get to know who each other is, I think is so incredibly important.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you mentioned in our little pre-interview questionnaire that like your favorite time with your family is when you're all just like chilling on your big family bed, right? And for me, that's very much the same. Like we'll have a family planning night on Sunday nights where we're just all sitting on our bed and it starts as planning and it usually ends in laughing, or talking to each other. And then of course, sometimes that ends in tears because someone will get in a fight or kick somebody in the face or whatever. But I would say that sets the stage for some really impactful moments for us.
I mean, I've even experienced with our 9-year-old. I mean, it's only happened maybe a handful of times where we've just had the opportunity to where we're not going a million miles a minute, where we have a little time to just chill and hang out. And he'll just start talking. And if you ask him more questions, he'll talk about, what he thinks about this or, what's going on at school or, just things that are rolling around in his brain. And I love that. Like, those are my favorite things when instead of just, instructions or did you do your homework or do this or do that or, hey, can you help with this? Do the dishes. It's actually what is inside their heads. And that's so important for us to understand because I think especially if it's in a situation where perhaps both parents are working, you get home from work, there's homework to do, there's dinner to be had, there's bedtime. And, often that time that we have with our kids is so limited and they spend more time with those outside the family rather than with family. And I think it's just so important to maximize those opportunities to just hear what's going on in their heads.
Now, for grownups who've maybe forgotten their why, what do you recommend? Where do they go back? Where do you search again for it?
Well, there's a range. So it can go anywhere from just taking time to reflect on when I am at my best or when I find the most meaning, what am I doing? And a little hint, it's when you're doing something for somebody else, not something for yourself. Yep. So it's, it could be as easy as reflection or, there are just countless tools and resources out there to help you go through that process. Obviously, we have a couple. There's an online course and a book that, walks you through that process. But I think the key is even as much reflecting as we do on this on our own, there comes a point where we have to enlist the help of somebody else because we often just can't see the patterns that are in our own lives. This is the reason we have to go to therapy. Like, we can't do that for ourselves. We have to go to somebody with an objective outside opinion who can see things that we can't see. So this why discovery process really is, yes, it's a self-discovery, and it requires that we enlist the help of somebody who doesn't know us too well, who can objectively look at these times in our lives, these stories that we tell, and help us to see those patterns that simply we can't see ourselves.
And would you say even you could ask your spouse or your friends for that feedback too? It's so nice to get that outside, but hey, what do you see in me? What do I do? Like, what lights me up? I think you can do that too, right? And hopefully get some insight from those people as well.
Sure. That's actually the way that Simon discovered his own why, was just to ask, really close friends and family, what difference do I make in your life, right?
And that's a scary question to ask.
Yeah.
Because what if somebody's like, not a lot?
We actually have, and it's interesting because Simon took the process that he sort of came up with to do this for himself. We have it as a free download on our website at startwithwhy.com, but it's called the Friends Exercise. But it basically walks you through how to effectively have this conversation with somebody. So that's a good first step. Usually what we recommend is that, people go through, if they really want to go through the process, to go through it with somebody who they know, who they trust, but doesn't know them as well as a spouse or, somebody who's super, super close. And then do that exercise as a follow-up just to reinforce what they've found or to, maybe bring some new ideas to light, perhaps that somebody that's a little bit more of a stranger wouldn't have seen.
Now, remind me, what's the course called? And they find it at startwithwhy.com.
The full course is the individual why discovery course. It's sort of an online, video-based course that we have. The book, Find Your Why, if you would prefer to hold something in your hand, it also takes you through that same process, but just in a little different format. And then the shorter exercise that I mentioned that Simon used to discover his own why initially is called the Friends exercise. And that's a free download on our website, startwithwhy.com as well.
Awesome. Dude, just in time for New Year's resolutions, right there.
Totally.
Kate, now you speak to a lot of corporate or like business groups, and I'm sure you're imparting a lot of tools and advice to them. What are like your top, maybe like 2 or 3 tools or mind shifts, or like your favorite things to focus people on?
Wow, only 2.
I'll let you do more. We got a minute.
No, it's okay. We'll think out loud for a bit and see what comes out. So I think the first thing is just, and it's very basic, but it's just giving people a reframe of how they think about work. I mean, I use the example, how many people growing up when they were kids said things like, when I grow up, I want to be an astronaut because I think I'll hate that.
No one.
Nobody, obviously, right? We wanted to do all these cool things. We wanted to be doctors and firefighters and astronauts and fighter pilots and like all this stuff that we would love to go back and do day after day after day, right? So what happens like between childhood and now, where 87% of people with a job either hate it or just don't really care about it? Like what happens? There's something going on there. And what happens is that I think most organizations put an unbalanced amount of focus on results, financials, profit, those kind of things. It's not that those things are unimportant. Obviously, we need to have those things. The key here is balance, right? We're unbalanced. We sacrifice people for the numbers. We do everything that we can to hit the quarterly number at the expense of everything else. And people feel that. And so when I go to work, and by the way, hitting a number inspires nobody ever. We can be motivated by hitting the number, obviously, but it doesn't bring meaning or fulfillment. So when we go to work and we're being pounded over the head to hit a number, of course, we're not going to find meaning or fulfillment in our work. Of course, we're going to come home exhausted and tapped out and not have anything left for our family. So the opportunity, obviously, is to, as an organization, figure out our why. What is our purpose? What is the human reason we exist? And yes, our product, our service is important, and that provides the fuel that we need to stay in business. But ultimately, our goal is something more. If you think about the word results, that's what it is. It is a result. It is not the goal. The goal should be something bigger. The result is what you get out of that allows you to do more of the goal, right? So it's just a reframe of how do we think about our jobs and the fact that we deserve to do something that is meaningful and that we love, because that's how we're naturally hardwired as human beings. We are meaning-seeking machines. We want to find meaning in what we do. We want to know our purpose. We want to know what we're here for. We want to, contribute to something that matters and that's bigger than us. And so that's just to bring people around to the possibility of that actually happening is one of the things that I love to share the most.
You're listening to the Today's Mama podcast with your host, Rachel Hersher. We'll be back right after this.
Looking for holiday gift ideas? I got you. I've talked about buying gift certificates on Christmas Eve. Yep, like after midnight. Chatbooks had me covered. I just hit print, and the next day I showed up like a champion. This year, I'm working in advance. Photo books for all my favorite peeps. They are the gifts that keep on giving. It's like giving happy. Each of my kids will get a photo book this year. Grandparents will get photo books. You'll get a photo book. Photo books for everyone. They're beautiful, they're personal, and the possibilities are endless. Chapbooks are printed with archival paper, premium quality inks, and durable perfect binding. Starting at just $10 for a 30-page book, making a photo book with chapbooks is as easy on your wallet as it is to make. Happy gifting.
And now back to the Today's Mama podcast with your host, Rachel Hersher.
And you know what? Before I let you do your second thing.
Yeah.
Can you find meaning in an organization that lacks meaning?
Yes. So again, because the why is something, our individual why is something very personal. It is essentially the way that we show up to the people who are around us. So most people, unless you work in a remote situation where you're, by yourself most of the time, but even then, you can get together through technology or sometimes in person. But the idea is that we can be the leader we wish we had. We can show up and be whoever we want to be. So we can positively affect the lives of the people around us, even in an environment where that's not really the norm. Now, it makes it more difficult. And obviously, if we have a leadership team for an organization or an entire organization that really buys into this and creates the environment for that type of thing to thrive, that's great. But that doesn't have to stop us from showing up and doing that on our own. Nobody is going to tell us that we can't, show up and be a gift or a light to the life of somebody around us. That's just something we can choose to do. Now, if we're in a toxic environment where, we are doing that every day and yet, it's not spreading as much as we would like to, and it's bringing us down, then we have a choice to make, obviously. But nothing dictates, no organization can dictate whether or not I can live my why at work.
Amen.
The second thing is really, it's more of a theme, which is just remembering the humanness in business or in life, because so often that gets clouded with other things, specifically with technology. And I think that applies absolutely at work and of course at home. So the other thing that I like to invite or encourage people to do or sort of bring to light is just this idea of like, put your phone down and talk to each other. I remember 2 or 3 years ago, you'd go out to dinner and every once in a while you'd see a couple at a table, both on their phones. And I would roll my eyes and I'd be like, oh, come on, you guys. And now it's like, you don't not see that all the time. And it's getting worse and worse and worse. And it boggles my mind that, we go out to dinner with our family and our friends and we spend our entire time there talking to people who aren't there, saying, hey, geez, I wish you were here. And we're not even like talking to the people that we're with. So this idea of just, technology absolutely has its benefits.
Yep.
A lot of incredible good can be done with it, and it absolutely cannot replace human interaction. So put your phone down. In a leadership capacity at work, if you're somebody's leader and they come up to you with a problem or a question or a concern and you are holding your phone, there is no doubt in their mind that they are not the most important thing to you in that moment. Put your phone down, shut your laptop, whatever you have to do to give that person your full attention and have a human experience.
And we're complaining so much about our kids, our dang kids who are on their phone so much. But as adults, we have to lead out with our habits. And I think they're a lot worse than we'd like to acknowledge.
Yes, they are. And I think the awareness of it is the first thing. We're not going to be perfect right off the bat, obviously. But I think, and especially if you're in a two-parent household, you can help each other, hold each other accountable. That, hey, if kids are talking to you and you got your phone in your hand or you're kind of doing the texting while you're doing the yeah, tell me more about that, like hold each other accountable and help each other, because a lot of times we don't realize ourselves the traps that we're falling into or the way that we use our technology in a way that might be negatively affecting somebody else.
And again, I think we can do that second chance thing with each other and consciously do this ourselves so we show our kids how to do it is, hey, I'm really sorry. I wasn't paying attention and I wasn't having very good habits with my phone. Will
Sure.
you just start over? Because I'm going to fix that.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I've learned in parenting that was so not a part of my upbringing was admitting mistakes as a parent and apologizing to my kids and saying, hey, I'm going to do better. That's huge.
I have the most vivid memory. I was probably in 2nd or 3rd grade, and my mom was getting mad at me about something that was unjust, and I had an opinion about it. I remember slamming my hand down. I just did it to my desk, slamming my hand down on the kitchen counter. I can visualize everything around me and telling her why that was wrong and how I felt. And the moment she stopped and said to me, you know what, you're right. I'm sorry. And that was such an indelible moment in my brain, but a really powerful thing to me where I think it really validated that I have a voice and that I could be right and that I could have an opinion, and I was probably 8 years old, but that stuck with me forever.
Yeah. And it's so funny in the work that we do, we sometimes call these things defining moments, which are these things that might be very, very small, or the person that's doing it might not even realize that they're doing it, but it has such an impact on us. And they're defining moments. They either help us take one step forward or one step back. It sounds like that was one for you. That's great.
Now, I have to hear, because you started talking about the things we wanted to be as kids and how nobody said, I want to grow up and be an astronaut. That probably sucks. It made me think of all the things I wanted to be as a kid. And I started to make the most random list. But before I tell you mine, I want to know, what did you want to be when you were a little kid?
Oh my gosh, I was so boring, dude.
In kindergarten, you wanted to be an accountant?
I wouldn't go that far, but I literally, I didn't know. Like, I didn't have like these crazy desires to be a particular thing. Like, I didn't really think about what I wanted to be when I grew up until I was probably, I don't know, 22.
Yeah.
So I'm one of those kids that just like, I don't know. I just didn't really know. I was too busy riding bikes in the dirt.
Well, and that's a good excuse.
So I want to hear your crazy list. Yeah.
Well, so mine started with that I wanted to be an astronaut, and that's why it made me laugh. And then I thought to myself, when did I want to not be an astronaut? And by fourth grade, I determined that I should be a comedian. And then in fifth or sixth grade, I thought I wanted to write Hallmark cards.
Wow.
And I started to submit Hallmark cards to Hallmark. I had pages and pages in like a yellow legal notebook. Just ridiculous. And then that moved on to be like a play therapist. I went to school for child life at the University of Utah. And then as I just evolved through life, I almost started a company called Pajanimals that was animal pajamas. And that's my biggest regret that I didn't do that, because they would have like clip-on tails and ears and stuff. And then it's just evolved to where I am now. I've run a publishing company and our website, and started a podcast and a marketing company. You know, I'm going to need to really sit down and look and find the common thread through that. But it was kind of a comical list for me.
Yeah, that's quite the range. Pretty good. Although I think you could have probably combined the comedian and the Hallmark card thing.
Yeah.
Would have been great.
Yeah, I did think I was writing funny cards. Oh, okay. Well, anything else we've missed that you want to toss out? Any like tools that you want to leave our listeners with?
So there's one thing that we've started doing in our home that I think is so incredibly important. I'll put it out there just as an idea. With technology, I think our kids are using it so much and they're interacting with it so much. And because it's not a human, I think oftentimes, what's the best way to say this? When they meet somebody new, or when somebody pays them a compliment, or when they ask for something from a person, we make sure that make sure you say thank you, make sure you say please. We like really try to ingrain these bits of etiquette, or these social things that we want to make sure our kids do. But with technology, and where they're interacting oftentimes with technology more than they are with human beings, they don't get very much of that. So one of the things that we've started doing in our house, which I think is really important, I can't say her name or else she'll activate, but the Amazon Echo device that we have, whenever we ask, and it's so funny that we say ask her because it's an it, but whenever we ask it to do something, we say please. So, and we're getting into the habit of, when we ask her for something or when we want her to do something, we say please at the end. And that's just one other way that we're helping to ingrain in our kids the importance of being polite when you ask for something, when you request something of somebody, that you ask nicely. So that's an interesting thing that we've started to do, and it's rubbing off.
And how quickly do our manners disappear when we're talking to a robot? Like, if I'm on hold with customer service, which is so frustrating, by the way, when it's the robot system that tries to decipher what's going on and points you in 20 different ways, and you're just so worn out by the end. I'm so mad at that robot helper. So mad. So I can be pretty short with those recordings. And I've often thought, if somebody were recording that, they'd probably be like, oh man, this woman is such a jerk. You told me you do something really important in your family for Christmas time. So you have a really cool Christmas tradition. Tell us about that and how that plays out, since Christmas is just around the corner.
Yeah. So when our kids were, obviously the 2-year-old wasn't around when we started doing this, but when our 9-year-old was smaller, we always had this thing where we wanted to do something for somebody for Christmas. And so we would usually wait, for Christmas time, and we would try to gather a bunch of stuff or buy a bunch of gifts and have Christmas for, an entire Christmas for a family, or just some big thing. And then as he got a little bit older and as things got a little bit more hectic, we had good intentions, but we never ended up, there were a couple of years that passed and we just didn't do anything because it was just too big. It was too much. We just had too much on our plate and we didn't do it. And I always felt bad about that. And so what I started doing, and we've had varying success, throughout the years, sometimes we're better at it, sometimes we're not. But rather than doing this one big thing at Christmas, we're certainly more conscious of it around Thanksgiving and Christmas, just because that's, it's a time of giving, and, it seems like our hearts are more open and our wallets are more open at this time of year. But one thing we've tried to do is more consistently throughout the year is just do small random acts that are really meaningful. So instead of, giving the panhandler $1, you say, hey, are you hungry? Like, what do you feel like eating? Go get him a meal, like talk to him, something like that. If we have the time, I want to give you an example of something that we did that just, like, I think about it even now, I will remember this for the rest of my life. And it was the simplest little thing that we've ever done.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we started doing is when we saw people, pulled off to the side of the road with their hazard lights on, we'd pull over and make sure they were okay and see if there's anything we could do to help. And usually it's like, oh no, I'm fine. I called my dad, they're going to come pick me up or whatever. But one time we were driving home and it was, I think it was January, February, something like that. And we were on the freeway and there was a ton of construction being done. And so most of the lanes were closed. There were just, we're kind of down to one lane and traffic was at a crawl. And it had just gotten dark and we were crawling along and we saw a car pulled over on the side, sort of in the construction zone, with his hazard lights on. And so I pulled over and I got out and it was a guy, Hispanic guy with, he was a painter and he'd gotten a flat tire. So his English wasn't great. My Spanish is non-existent. So, we tried to communicate a little bit and I offered to help him. He had his trunk just full of painting stuff and his spare tire, of course, was at the bottom of all that. So I helped him, empty his trunk. We got spare tire. He couldn't find, the lug wrench for a while. So we were there for like a good half hour, 40 minutes. So finally got his tire changed. And he was telling me how, he was, trying to get home because, it was getting late and he had to be back super early in the morning to finish this job back in Utah County. And so we sort of chatted as best we could as we were going through all this. I got done and I always carry like a $50 bill, just it's the only cash I carry. And so I helped him put all the stuff back in his trunk. And as he was closing his trunk, I walked back there and I handed him the 50 and I said, I hope this helps to, get you a new tire or whatever. And it wasn't that, but then like we hugged each other. And we like held it for a really long time, like probably a good 10, 15 seconds, which doesn't sound like a long time. But when you're hugging a stranger, that's a long time. And we both started to cry. And like, it was the most beautiful experience just from, choosing to do something small instead of trying to take on a huge, big project that, was overwhelming. And, by the end of it, you're, so frustrated because it took so long. You just do these little things that really make a big difference in the life of another human being. And that's what we try to think about more, at Christmas, but kind of try to carry that throughout the rest of the year.
And that cascades down through the way the rest of that gentleman's day or week went and probably how he would treat other people or how he would see, emergent hazard lights on the side of the road. And then the same thing for you, right? Like you see those hazard lights again and you say, oh, you know what? That was a great experience. And it makes sense to stop. So there's an effect that goes a lot further than just even that beautiful moment you just told us about. It really changes things moving forward.
Yeah. And sometimes we see the impact of that and sometimes we don't. But I think the way that we, make sure that it's happening is we just do it more often.
Now I'm going to transition to something totally tacky from there. And I apologize in advance because I can't leave this episode without highlighting the fact that you mentioned that you spend way too much money at Lululemon.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, same here. I'm guessing we probably even go to the same Lululemon. Do you go to Fashion Place?
Yeah, I was there yesterday.
And I was there on Saturday and I found out I had this random leftover gift card in my purse that had probably been there a year. And I thought there's no way there's money on this. And I went up to the register and I'm like, can you just like check and tell me if there's anything here? And the lady's like, it's your lucky day. You got $150.
Whoa, that's like a pair of socks. That's awesome.
Seriously, I high-fived everybody at like the cashier table, like the main desk. I was so pumped. Okay, so my husband loves their shirts, and he better not be listening to this episode until after Christmas because I can tell you right now that he's getting several Lululemon polos with my gift card. What are your favorite finds for guys in there? Because there's some good stuff.
I love the ABC jogger and the City Sweat jogger. Those are probably two of my favorite pants. The only shirts that I wear on stage, actually, when I'm doing speaking and workshops, are Lulu button-downs or button-ups, however you want to talk about that.
They're so good.
Oh my gosh, they're so good. So those are my go-tos.
Yeah. You're welcome, America.
Yeah.
We just handled your Christmas shopping and basically all you need to wear for the next year. I mean, I will always be found and am currently in some high-waisted Lulu yoga pants because why put on pants with buttons?
Totally.
Their sweatshirt fabric in there is just like butter. Just wrap your whole body in it. You just can't go wrong.
Can't.
So Well, thank you for ending on that my really tacky Lululemon plug. I mean, I feel like we should probably be getting some commission checks or something.
Yeah, I'll be looking for
when everybody shows up in their ABC joggers.
Totally.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show, and maybe I'll see you around town. Let's make it happen.
Yeah, that would be great. What a cool connection. Thanks, Rachel.
Yep, that's right. We just ended that episode with basically a love song to Lululemon. Unintentional and totally not sponsored. But listen, I don't even care anymore where you fall on the yoga pants as pants argument. They're basically whatever you want them to be. But here's my promise. We'll have a post up on todaysmama.com, the love letter to our love song of all our favorite things we find at Lululemon. And hey, I get it. There are less expensive leggings out there. You will leave the store much poorer than you walked in, wondering if you made the choice. But when you roll through your day in those high-waisted Lulus, they'll be paying you back for years. Find that post and more guest features from David Mead on todaysmama.com. And as always, you can find the show notes and links to all of those posts I mentioned at todaysmama.com/podcast.
You've been listening to the Today's Mama podcast with Rachel Hersher. To find out more, go to todaysmama.com. That's today's, MAMA.com. Today's Mama, connecting moms and families with the best of today.